Hello everyone. Today we will talk with you about the degradation of bodybuilding. We will try to figure out how this aesthetic beauty contest has changed, how this sport has changed. Although it was not considered as such, because athletes do not compete in strength, speed, endurance, and other physical qualities, but demonstrates their aesthetics, shape, mass, relief, and proportions. However, if earlier bodybuilding could really be called a beauty and aesthetics contest, now it is impossible to say this in principle. Even in the days of ancient Greece, it was known that a person who plays sports always has more developed muscles. Yevgeny Sandov, a wrestler and athlete working in a circus, is considered the founding father of bodybuilding. It was he who published a book called Bodybuilding in 1903. Which translates to bodybuilding. By the way, it is the Sandoval statuette that is presented to the winners of the Mr. Olympia competition. His body looked really aesthetically pleasing and quite dried, but of course, you cannot compare with modern athletes. By the way, it was he who adhered to the principles of load progression. To increase the volume, this factor became revolutionary in building the body. The more weight you take, the more muscles you will have in the end. Since 1940, Mr. America and Mr. Universe began to hold competitions, and then such an athlete as Steve Reeves came out for the first roles in world bodybuilding. According to the photos of this athlete, we can already talk about the bodybuilder approaching that very golden era. It is worth noting that the invention of a method for obtaining testosterone dates back to 1939. Therefore, no one knows exactly when steroids began to be used in bodybuilding. Since 1968, the Bodybuilding Federation has become completely independent and was named the International Bodybuilding Federation (IFBB). Before that, it was part of the Weightlifting Federation. Today, 170 countries of the world are members of this organization. Athletes such as Larry Scott and Sergio Oliva have been coming to the fore in world bodybuilding since the 1960s. It is for sure possible to say that all athletes use doping, however. The athlete's form remains aesthetic, and just looking at this, you also want to train with iron and grow muscles. Since the 70s, the most popular and famous era of bodybuilding begins, where Arnold Schwarzenegger wins the Mr. Olympia tournament for 6 years in a row. Bodybuilders then focused on heavy weights, and with extremely serious cheating. This can be seen in such films as, for example, Pumping Iron. How they simply destroyed themselves and this iron with strong cheating. And as a result of grueling work and pharmacology, athletes gained excellent shape. Bodybuilders became more massive, but still had the proper relief and proportions. The Arnold era popularized bodybuilding all over the world. Schwarzenegger was replaced on the podium by his friends Frank Zane and Franco Columbu. When Arnold temporarily ended and returned again, the first consequences of using drugs appeared on the Olympia stage. Franco Columbu became the champion at that time. But the decision of the judges was very controversial, because the athlete subsequently seriously injured his leg, and it seemed to be no longer the same as before, and the proportions were not the same in addition. Franco clearly had unilateral gynecomastia. Most likely this is due to the fact that pharmacology was not studied as well as it is now. Then athletes took it uncontrollably with the absence of PCT, and could not track all this in the analyses. Then no one thought about it. Nevertheless, with such disadvantages, the bodybuilders still became Mr. Olympia in 1981. Until the end of the 90s, bodybuilding gradually progressed. But it did not change dramatically. Towards the end of the 80s and early 90s, growth hormone began to be used in bodybuilding, which according to some reports is the cause of large bellies in athletes. Again, this has not been fully proven, but it is impossible to deny the fact of the effect. It has an anti-catabolic effect and significantly improves body relief. In addition, synthol and insulin are becoming popular. And in general, bodybuilders have always tried to use all possible ways to achieve the highest results during this time. Chris Dickerson, Samir Banat, Lee Haney, and Dorian Yates. Gradually, athletes became drier and more prominent in comparison with the golden era of bodybuilding, but it was still considered aesthetics for the time being. And with the advent of the era of Coleman, the years of dominance of this bodybuilder radically changed the standards of bodybuilding, and it turned from aesthetic to monstrous. If you walk down the street and show ordinary people photos of Ronnie and, for example, the same Zane, then the vast majority will clearly lean towards the latter. Coleman's form is difficult to call aesthetic. With all due respect to the athlete, here you have an unrealistically huge muscle mass and a large bulging belly. It is strange that all this was then appreciated and encouraged by the Bodybuilding Federation for 8 long years. Ronnie became the owner of the title Mr. Olympia, and for such a period of time he quite strongly replaced the standards and bodybuilding towards volumes. Contrary to the quality and aesthetics, of course, over time, Ronnie began to have health problems with unrealistically huge weights, high dosages, and a great sporting football past. Unfortunately, now the former bodybuilder is more concerned about his physical well-being. With the arrival of Jay Cutler and Dexter Jackson, monstrous in the waist area, and there was no proper aesthetics in principle. It is worth noting that Dexter Jackson looked more aesthetic than Cutler. Look at the belly of the bodybuilders, at least. It's all because of the shifting standards of the updated Ronnie's objectivity prevailed in 2008, where Dexter still won. Since 2011, Phil Heath, already famous to the public, has been actively breaking into Olympia. He was quite massive, dried out, and had a relatively narrow waist. He easily ousted his rivals and took the place of champion for a long time. Everything was fine for the time being. Bodybuilding gradually moved away from monstrosity, and compared to the same Coleman, it was much better in terms of aesthetics, but every year Phil Heath became more and more massive, and the waist only increased, which crossed out bodybuilding forecasts for a return to the standard of the golden era. Female bodybuilding began to turn into a freak show in general, which was disgusting to watch due to the huge mass. The desire for muscle growth sometimes negates the hope for both female and male bodybuilding. Meanwhile, professional bodybuilding showed us the rivalry between Kai Green and Phil Heath, but again it's not clear what they were competing with. Who will inflate the belly more? Or who will blow it away more? Both that athlete did not show us proper aesthetics. The hit won, and Kai Green left the stage. After all this, it was at the Arnold Classic 2015 that Schwarzenegger expressed his dissatisfaction with the forms of modern bodybuilders. It's just amazing what happens on stage. No one can pull in their stomach for a long time, and even more so demonstrate on the stage is a vacuum when the stomach is tense and retracted. The shoulders are straightened. It is really impossible to look at all this. Phil Heath, who only increased his belly every year, did not agree with this. It was also due to hernia surgery, and there may have been other reasons, but the judges gave him victory until 2018, but that year everything had already gone beyond what was allowed. Is this really the same Mr. Olympia for whom everything is supposedly should they be equal in terms of aesthetics and proportions? And then Sean Roden won, who tried to keep his waist, having more accurate and symmetrical proportions. I want to say that he really looked decent. Now it seems like athletes are striving to keep their waistline. However, there are still a lot of pot-bellied jocks of monsters that ordinary people only disgust. It is worth saying that the popularity of this direction is falling every year. Few people are interested in Olympia. Even though there are aesthetic categories like that men's physique, classic physique, which is very encouraging and gives hope. But they are still not popular enough and do not have such an impact on the overall picture, and bodybuilding is still going down its popularity, or is it just another turn in its story? In conclusion, I want to say that bodybuilding has come a very long way. There have been various changes. Initially, bodybuilding was an example of beauty and aesthetics, but over time, with the development of training programs, nutrition, pharmacology, sports supplements, and other things, athletes became large and voluminous, plus cental, insulin and growth hormone influenced the shape of athletes. Huge bellies began to appear, and bodybuilding no longer attracts much attention from ordinary people, which led to a decrease in its popularity in society. However, perhaps everything will change soon. In any case, you will have to change something. Otherwise, this discipline risks finally going to the bottom. Experiments with new categories are the best example of this. I hope this was interesting for you. This channel is devoted in general to the topic of sports, about bodybuilding, fitness, and many other things while maintaining maximum objectivity. So don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss the new video. See you soon.